All right. Okay, great. I'll call the March 18th Planning Commission to order. Will everyone please stand, and Commissioner Ketting, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Staff roll call, please.
All commissioners are present this evening.
Great, thank you. Public comments. This is the time we take public comments on items that are not on the agenda, that are generally within the purview of the Planning Commission. If you wish to speak, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Please call 949-270-8165 to provide public comments on non-agenda items. First, we'll go to the right here. Mr. Mosher, how are you?
Thank you, Chair Wigan, members of the Commission. My name is Jim Mosher. The non-agenda item I wanted to talk to you about is your rules of procedure for how your meetings are conducted. You're probably not aware of this, but last Wednesday, the Harbor Commission, recognizing that they are now, their existence is memorialized in the city charter, thought that it would be good for themselves to adopt rules of procedure so that their meetings would take place in a more orderly, predictable fashion. And the rules of procedure they adopted were essentially copied from yours. And in copying them, they noticed several anomalies that you might at some point want to revisit and revise your own rules of procedure. The first anomaly was one of their main reasons for doing this was that the staff had been encouraging them to memorialize all their actions by formal resolutions, as you do here and have done for decades. Oddly, in your rules of procedure, it says nothing about the resolutions that you adopt or what the procedure for doing that or modifying them is. The second thing is it seemed like it would be a very good idea at their meetings to have clear rules for how the public hearings are held. Who speaks first, the applicant, the staff, who has a chance to respond to who, and so on. And it turns out that in your rules of procedure, although it lays out the order of the agenda, when it comes to a public hearing, it doesn't explain at all how the public hearing is held. Yet you seem to have a very rigid procedure that you follow. It would be good for that to be written down so people would know it in advance. And then finally, as part of your hearing procedure for the last year or so, the commissioners have been dutifully disclosing their ex parte communications that they have had. The fact that you do that or what that disclosure should include is not currently included in your rules of procedure. And I would note that the legal staff of the city, in suggesting the wording for that, told the Harbor Commission that the disclosure should include not just the fact that you spoke to somebody and who, but also the substance of the communication and when it took place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosher. Anyone else? And staff, just on the community room, is there somebody there that's guiding them here, or is it just an option for the public?
It is an option for the public, but we'll monitor it.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone on the phone with non-agenda comments? Okay, great. I'll move on to the next item, request for continuances. Staff, are there any requests?
Mr. Chairman, there is no request for continuances, but I just want to note that item number 3, the Westcliff Plaza, has been withdrawn.
Great. Thank you so much. Consent items. Moving on to consent item number 1, minutes from the March 4th, 2021 meeting. If you would like to comment, please call 949-270-8165. And I believe we received some comments from Mr. Mosher. And is there any questions or comments from commissioners? And I'll go to the room and the phones. Okay, any commissioners want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes, incorporating Mr. Mosher's comments.
Great, thank you. In a second, please.
A second.
Great. All right, I'll call for the vote.
The motion carries 6-0 with Commissioner Klostermeyer abstaining.
Great, thank you. All right, public hearing items. This is item number 1, the Collins residence. It's the appeal and amendment, PA 2020-215. The site location is 413 and 413.5 Edgewater Place. Again, if you want to comment on this item, please call 949-270-8165. Staff, please proceed with your presentation.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Patrick Akis with the Planning Division. I'll deliver a very brief presentation on this item. The request is to revise a coastal development permit that was previously approved by the zoning administrator. The property is located on the north side of the peninsula, 2 blocks east of the Balboa Island Ferry. On either side, Cypress Street and Adams Street. The property is separated from the bay by a public walkway and city-owned bulkhead, both of which would not be modified by the project. Here's a look at a snapshot of events. The original approval from the zoning administrator consisted of the demolition of an existing duplex and the construction of a single-family residence. During the project's appeal period with the California Coastal Commission, 2 commissioners appealed the project due to concerns over the loss of density. Coastal Commission staff prepared a recommendation of substantial issue, but the project was taken off the meeting calendar at the request of the applicant, who has since worked with the commission staff to redesign the project. The revised project before you includes an accessory dwelling unit on the 2nd floor, so density would be maintained. If the commission chooses to approve the revised project and it's agreeable to the California Coastal Commission, the appeal would be suspended. Here's a look at what's proposed by the project. In yellow, you'll see what is new and part of this revision. So again, demolish the existing duplex and construct a single-family residence and junior accessory dwelling unit. You'll note that junior accessory dwelling units do not require parking. The property is located between the first public road and the sea, so a coastal development permit is required to ensure the project conforms to the land use, development, public access, and resource protections outlined in the Certified Local Coastal Program. The project is consistent with the coastal development permit findings. When staff analyzes visual impacts, we not only look at designated viewpoints, but potential public views. In this case, it would be the waterfront and the walkway. And the project would actually enhance these existing views with architectural treatments. It fits within the development envelope, doesn't contain any unique or special features that could degrade the visual quality of the coastal zone. The nearest public viewpoint is located at Peninsula Park, shown by the sunglasses there on the south side of the peninsula, and does not orient toward the property. Lateral access would be maintained, as shown in blue, on the public walkway, and vertical access is provided at either street end. As explained, the project would not result in a loss of density with the inclusion of the junior accessory dwelling unit. Conditions of approval are included in the draft resolution for the project. We have the standard substantial conformance with the required findings and approved plans. Condition number 5 requires a deed restriction for the ADU, acknowledging a owner occupancy requirement, prohibiting the individual sale of the dwelling unit, junior accessory dwelling unit, and prohibits short-term lodging. Conditions of approval number 6 and 33 ensure that the development wouldn't go beyond the private property or impact access or the right-of-way. Staff does recommend that the commission find this project exempt from CEQA under the Class 3 and adopt the resolution approving the project. The applicant and designer, Bill Gadaro, is here tonight and is available to answer any questions. And of course, I am happy to answer any questions as well.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Commissioners, any questions for Patrick? Commissioner Kenny.
Patrick or Jim, is there a minimum square footage for a junior accessory unit?
Per the California Building Code, I believe it would have to at least qualify as an efficiency unit. Typically, we deal with the maximum of 500 square feet for a junior accessory dwelling unit.
So that's in the state code.
Correct. The minimum area, I believe, maybe Simone can correct me, would be the size of an efficiency unit.
So,
Thank-
and Commissioner Kenny, the efficiency units are 120 square feet. So it's 120 to maximum of 500 for a junior ADU.
So the minimum is 120.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for commissioners? Commissioner Kleiman.
First of all, I want to say I liked your graphics. Nice touch. I guess I'm just kind of, can maybe city attorney can kind of go over for everybody's better understanding the, we have this fantastic LCP that we work so hard on, and sometimes it's difficult, I think, to wrap your head around these appeals and something that is appealable versus something that isn't. I don't know. Jim looks like he's poised to respond instead, but either one.
Yeah, given the location of this property, it is, any coastal development permit that we would issue is definitely appealable to the Coastal Commission. In this case, it was appealed by 2 coastal commissioners over the loss of the density going from a duplex to a single family. And so the applicant has redesigned the project with a junior accessory dwelling unit, and it's coming back to us to resolve the case satisfactorily to Coastal Commission staff. So if you're looking at general appeals, it's basically proximity to water, coastal bluffs, and wetlands. And, there's definitely areas that we just do not completely control our destiny.
But there are areas within the coastal zone that are not appealable, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There are areas that we retained full jurisdiction with no ability to appeal, and these are areas that are further away from those resources. But we also have a categorical exclusion order where the commission has basically pre-approved different categories of development. In fact, if you step across the street to the other side of the street, you could do this project without a coastal development permit at all, and that was something that was sought by the city and granted by the Coastal Commission. And just that first row of lots right along the water, have to go through a coastal development permit process.
So I guess my just general sense is, or question really, is about this process. And I mean, I know we have a lot of things, a lot of changes at the state level and beyond. And I'm just curious if this is what we can expect, like this kind of scrutiny going forward, and property owners who purchase property with certain rights in mind. Like, for example, if you bought 2 lots and you intended to combine them and build one home, and things like that, or what we're looking at here, being sort of forced, if you will, to do something with the property that really isn't your intended use. It's troubling for me.
In this particular case, we have SB 330, which is embodied in state law now, which
Right.
does not allow the reduction in density. So that's a state overriding, if you will, of taking down a duplex and building a single family. And so, this is consistent with that law.
Right. So is Coastal literally staffed with people to just comb through every single application in the coastal zone throughout the state to this level of detail and scrutiny?
I believe they are. They're reviewing every notice of final action that we submit to I don't know how in-depth that review is, but they do appeal some cases from time to time. We have a few pending appeals, and I think that's to be expected.
And so our initial review, or the zoning administrator's initial review, was that it was sufficient, met that standard, but Coastal didn't agree.
Yes, it's our belief that taking down a duplex and building a single family is consistent with SB 330. The Coastal Commission staff and their legal counsel disagree with that interpretation, and they're using the Coastal Act as a means to affect that policy, because the SB 330, that particular law, does not apply to the Coastal Commission, but they're applying the Coastal Act, and they're looking at it as a diminishment of access to the coast by eliminating these units. So they want to preserve every last unit. And so it's a difference of opinion between 2 organizations. And in this case, the applicant decided to just simply revise the project, include the junior accessory dwelling unit, and move on. and this resolves the appeal that the commissioners, the concern of loss of density that led to the appeal, and that was the applicant's choice. Rather than trying to fight the Coastal Commission, this was their tactic, if you will.
Okay, thank you. I think that's really helpful context.
Any other commissioner questions? All right, starting with Commissioner Rosine, ex parte communications.
None.
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 None from me.
None for me.
None?
None for me either. I'll open up the public hearing and ask if the applicant wants to make any presentation or comments. Okay, great. All right, and then I'll take public comment on this item. If you're watching remotely and want to provide comments, the phone number is 949-270-8165. First, I'll go to the chambers and Mr. Mosier.
Thank you, Chair Wigand, members of the commission. My name again is Jim Mosier. As we heard, this item approved by the zoning administrator was appealed by 2 of the California Coastal Commissioners. Primarily or perhaps exclusively over their concern about the loss of density, the concept being that they want to keep housing confined to the areas where it has already been approved and want to maximize the use of those so that other areas won't have to be used for residential. The staff report creates the impression that the Coastal Commission agreed with those 2 commissioners and found there was a substantial issue with that. But my reading of the report is was the basis of the appeal by the 2 commissioners. It was agreed to by the Coastal Commission staff, who thought there was a substantial issue with that, but it's never been heard by the Coastal Commission, so we do not know if the Coastal Commission finds substantial issue with this or not. And what they might decide is somewhat unpredictable. Actually, in 2019, in their November 13th hearing, they heard a very similar conversion of a duplex to a large single-family home proposed by the exact same owner and architect on West Oceanfront, and at that time, the staff thought that there was no concern about the loss of density. And the Coastal Commission as a whole agreed with them that there was no substantial issue there. However, I do know from watching recent Coastal Commission hearings that at least one of the commissioners who appealed this would still be not satisfied that this is preserving density adequately. In Hermosa Beach, they have been approving duplexes converted to single-family homes with an ADU because the zoning there sometimes does not allow a duplex to be built. But in areas where a duplex could be built, those commissioners would insist on that which should be what is built. I noticed there's an extensive reply to the appeal by our own staff here, and I would just point out that that is not necessarily the only interpretation of how our LCP works. This particular property is in an area that's not only RT, which means 2-family homes, but it's also in the LUP category RT-E, which is the highest density of 2-family homes. And we have numbers in the LCP that say the density should be between 30 and 40 dwelling units per acre in that area. Building a single-family home here produces only a density of 13.6. It's way outside the range. The city staff says that those numbers should be a maximum, but if they were actually a maximum, why would there be a range of 30 to 39? Why wouldn't there just be a number that that's the maximum density you can have? And perhaps the staff says that a single-family home is allowed in the RTE area, but perhaps it's allowed only where the size of the lot produces the correct density when you have a single-family home. So there are alternative explanations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Any other public comment in the chambers? Is there anyone on the phone Okay, staff, do you want to address Mr. Mosier's comments?
Well, I would just simply say that the proposed project is consistent with the local coastal program. I also note that the Coastal Commission certified our implementation plan, which is part of the local coastal program. It's in our municipal code, and it does allow a single-family residence and a duplex on all designated properties. So the maximum density you could ever have is a duplex, regardless of the numeric density range that you might otherwise achieve. And the last thing I would say is that the density ranges that are there are really indicative of the neighborhood that is within. It is a fairly dense neighborhood because the lots are fairly small, and that's what that's really intended to designate. But the allowable land uses or uses for an RT property is a single family or a duplex. And in either case, you can also have a junior accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. So, in summary, it is consistent with the LCP. And I think Mr. Mosier's comments about how the coastal commissioners would think about this, is to be determined. Coastal staff directed the applicant that this is the appropriate process to modify the project and is satisfied that this is consistent and appropriately addresses the appeal. So if there is an approval tonight, we would send a notice of final action to the Coastal Commission, as we would on any coastal development permit. And then the coastal commissioners or any other interested party has the ability to appeal this project again. It'll be a separate new appeal. And we'll find out if there's an issue there. Coastal staff does not believe that there is an issue and doesn't anticipate a coastal commissioner appeal if we approve this project tonight.
Great, thank you, Mr. Campbell. And I will go back to the applicant and see if they agree with all the recommended conditions. And great, thank you. And do you want to add any more comments, or are you good? Okay, no more public speakers, I see. Okay, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Keding.
Excuse me, Jim. This seems to be a mirror image of what we approved 2 weeks ago when we had a fourplex going to 2 single families. They then arm wrestled and threw in the same kind of junior accessory unit. Same thing?
This project is identical in that respect, yes. It's just half the size of the project we saw last week.
Okay. And just a curious question. While walking down there on that public walkway, looking at this building, I turned around. That's a little bit of sandy beach behind the seawall. Is that public or private?
It is privately owned out to the mean high tide line, approximately.
Oh, okay.
And there is a public walkway that's there. It's been there for many, many decades.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other commissioners' comments? Entertain a motion? Commissioner Keding.
I'll make a motion for approval. And again, applaud the applicant and their consultants for arm wrestling and making the thing work for them. So we are approving a coastal development permit and zoning clearance, I think. And that could be it. Am I mistaken, Jim?
I think the simplest motion would be to take the recommended actions in the staff report.
Right.
And that would cover everything.
All right. So go.
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. I'll call for the vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Great, thank you. The decision becomes final if not appealed to the City Council within 14 days. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which was posted as item 3, Westcliff Plaza Parking Waiver, PA 2019-2006. Site location is 1000 through 1150 Irvine Avenue.
Mr. Chair, this application has been withdrawn by the Irvine Company, and so there is no application to review, so there's no action for us to take this evening.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we'll go to the study session now. This is item number 4, the circulation
Chair.
element.
Chair, could I ask staff a question about why was it withdrawn?
See, the applicant's representative indicated to us that the Irvine company just wanted to rethink this application. They didn't want to pursue these improvements at this time. I think they felt there may have been some neighborhood controversy, and they didn't want to stir that up, if you will. That's about all I've got for you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move to study session. Item number 4, the circulation element update. Site location is citywide. Again, if you want to comment on this item, please call 949-270-8165, and staff provide a presentation.
Yes, good evening, Chair Wigan, Planning Commissioners. My name is Tony Brine, City Traffic Engineer. What we'll do tonight is step through the initial draft of the circulation element update, which was released to the public last week for review. Tonight I have with me Tony Petros with LSA Associates, and Tony worked together with me on preparing the draft update. So if you have any questions during the process or at the end of the presentation, Tony's available to answer those. So there is a history of bringing this item here to the Planning Commission. Initially, it was presented to the Planning Commission, giving a discussion of the Planning Commission's possible role in overseeing the preparation with the community and with staff, and that was in September. Following that, in October of last year, the City Council made the decision officially to delegate the responsibility to the Planning Commission for oversight role. Commissioner Ketting was then selected to be the liaison between the Planning Commission and the Housing Element Update Committee. November the 19th, then, staff presented a presentation, basically an overview of the existing circulation element to give you an understanding of what is in the current circulation element. And then in a number of meetings since then, Jim has presented status updates for the current status of the circulation element work. We've had 4 virtual public workshops with the community. The initial one being November 23rd, which was just after your first presentation. And then we had back-to-back workshops in December on the 15th and 16th, where we took the 8 different themes, the 8 different sections in the element, broke them down and discussed them in detail, 4 on the first workshop, 4 on the second. And then we came back in February with a visioning workshop where we presented some ideas for new policies, new goals, and took a lot of feedback from the community from that workshop. So quickly, a summary of the existing circulation element and the changes. We updated the narrative pretty much entirely. The first portion of the circulation element, all of the text and narrative was updated to bring it current from the 2006 form to conditions today in 2021. There are 92 existing policies, as I mentioned, under the 8 different categories. 62 of those policies are going to be proposed to be unchanged, and the reason for that is a lot of the policies in the circulation element are general in language, in general in their goals. And so even though this was written in 2006, they're still current today. They're still relevant today in 2021 as much as they were in 2006. So we're not proposing changes to a number of them. 30 of the existing policies we're going to update to bring them up to current vision, current times, and in some cases those changes are very minimal, a single word or a few words, just to make a change to the current conditions. And then we're proposing 22 new policies which are come about through state mandates and a lot of cases, comments that we receive from the community through the workshops. So for the unchanged policies, and this is just a smattering of the ideas of the ones that have been unchanged. The comprehensive integrated transportation system, so this covers essentially providing a number of different mobility, means of mobility. Supporting public transit services, there's different policies for working with OCTA on the public transit. The consistency with the OCTA master plan and with our master plan of streets and highways. The different policies for providing different pedestrian, bicycle, equestrian trails in the system, the general goals for that. Traffic signal operations and coordination with the adjacent jurisdictions regarding traffic signal operations, and that's to make sure that we're constantly monitoring the traffic signal timing and updating it. Providing adequate and convenient parking for any new development, and also looking at things such as shared parking, parking management programs. There's policies, current policies for that. And then there's a number of policies related to funding, and they're broken down between different types of funding, whether it's state or local funding, grants. A lot of those are still current today, where there's no real need to change a lot of the different policies under the funding. Also, some of the updated policies talking about regional transit in high-density areas. And in this particular case, updating the policy because the policy as it's written today talked about having transit in high-density areas in the airport area. And so we wanted to change that from just a focus on the airport area to a citywide focus. Improving connectivity to places of interest. So this is connectivity between transit and different commercial or residential or parks and recreation areas, schools, that type of improving the connectivity there. Minimizing conflict with new modes of transit. And this was a topic that came out in a few workshops where the concerns about e-bikes and a lot more use of e-bikes and conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians and e-bikes. And so we've put a policy together to look at different ways of perhaps changing the sidewalk use or widening sidewalks to make it safer. Promoting and encouraging telecommuting, definitely. We're seeing a lot more telecommuting, obviously, with COVID. And we want to see if there's a way that we can at least encourage additional telecommuting or continuation of telecommuting as it improves traffic flow, reduces the volume of trips on the roadway. Requiring bicycle amenities in new development projects. This can be just bike racks or putting in bike storage stations, lockers, showers, etc. Just ways of doing additional bicycle improvements. Reviewing the parking requirements in the municipal code, and this is something that council has provided direction that they want staff to look at parking requirements in the municipal code and whether there should be any changes made. And the Santa Ana River mobility, and this is another one that came out of the workshops. Currently, the policy talks about the 19th Street Bridge over the Santa Ana River, and that bridge was removed from the OCTA master plan a few years ago, and so we're removing it from our master plan, obviously. And in this case, what we're talking about is, are there ways of making mobility improvements or different types of projects in the area of the Santa Ana River that gives you options for mobility? So the legal mandates and the regional plans. There are two primary legal mandates that need to be incorporated in the circulation element update. One is the Complete Streets Act of 2008. And remember that this circulation element is from 2006. So we need to incorporate in this update the Complete Streets Act, which provides for a multimodal transportation system. And that incorporates the needs of all users, vehicles, bicyclists, pedestrians, transit, all different types of users, seniors, children, etc. You want to include facilities for all of those different types of users in a complete street. And SB 743, the vehicle miles traveled, last year we presented that to you and to City Council for approval. And this is the new process to review CEQA impacts on traffic and development versus the level of service standard, which was the common way of reviewing traffic impacts. Now in CEQA documents such as an EIR, vehicle miles traveled is the mandate. But it's important to note that we will continue with the level of service analysis in all the traffic documents That is a consistent policy that will not be changed in this update. And then also the long-range plans, the Connect SoCal, which is the SCAG long-range strategy and plan. We're going to be consistent with that, and we have been, and that's not going to change. And a lot of the different types of mobility needs, and they have the same types of overlaps that we have as far as long-range planning. So some new policies that we're going to be implementing. We're separating out and putting in two separate sections, new sections for climate change and emerging technology. As part of that, the Complete Streets Master Plan is a new policy where we want to work towards preparing and implementing a Complete Streets Master Plan. So we don't have particular implementation plan at this point. This would be a larger document consistent with something like the Bicycle Master Plan, where it has a lot of goals and projects that could be incorporated. Looking at studying a pilot shuttle system, which could connect different areas in the city, different villages, between, say, here in Newport Center to Corona del Mar or to Balboa Island. There has been some initial discussion with OCTA on something like that, a micro-mobility system. The safe system approach policy, that's a little bit different than a lot of cities and throughout the country, and also internationally. They have a system and a program called Vision Zero. And in the Vision Zero program, the ultimate goal is to have 0 fatalities on the roadway. The safe system approach is basically steps back from that and says, that goal of 0 fatalities may not be a realistic goal because you can never take away the way that humans drive, and that they're, that they will make mistakes, and there will be issues with that. And the safe system approach looks at a lot of different factors, and there's different responsibilities for the user, the roadway users, in addition then providing for safe streets, safe cars, providing for emergency response, much larger type of approach. And in this case, the types of things that you would put into a roadway system would be, say, separating out the different users, so providing different facilities and separated facilities for bikes versus the cars, or looking at ways of reducing speed on the roadway as well. That's an important part of the safe system approach. Construction management plans, we have a policy that we've drafted for that for new development. In some cases, the larger projects that are coming through, we have been working with and conditioning developers to provide this, ways to look at managing the truck routes and parking perhaps as part of that larger project. But it's never been documented as a requirement. So we wanted to include that policy. And monitoring land development projects in adjacent jurisdictions. And again, this one has never been really a documented policy. But what we want to do is make sure that staff is constantly monitoring any adjacent jurisdictions. Irvine and Costa Mesa would be the primary ones that we would monitor, and look for the development projects they have and make sure that we've fully reviewed their plans, their studies, traffic studies, their environmental documents, to make sure if there are any things that we want to condition, or if there's traffic impacts in the city, that we can make sure that we've provided those comments. Additionally, the current Bicycle Master Plan, it's the 2014 Bicycle Master Plan. It's a standalone document right now. But what we want to do is take that and incorporate it into the circulation element so that it formally becomes part of the circulation element. And then as part of that, then we would work towards implementing a lot of different improvement projects that are outlined in the circulation, or in the Bicycle Master Plan. So, and also require bicycle improvements in new development projects. We want to monitor rideshare, different types of rideshare, Uber and Lyft, becoming much more used by residents and a lot more prevalent. So we want to monitor the use of Uber and Lyft, and then we want to look at what is curbside management for them. Is it a good thing to look at providing loading zones for Uber and Lyft so that they're not blocking traffic when they're dropping off people or picking up people? We want to monitor autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles for their future use, and that would mean the types of communication improvements and communication infrastructure that we would want to incorporate into road improvement projects. And that could be new traffic signal equipment, having additional loops into the roadway, all ways of having that communication system ready so that at some point when autonomous vehicles become more prevalent or starting to be used, that the infrastructure is there. And then we want to communicate with some of the different types of providers such as Waze and Google Maps, because we've received a number of comments, and this came up in the workshops, about rerouting of traffic through residential neighborhoods. In a lot of cases, these apps will do that if there's congestion on the roadway. They'll just reroute the driver through a neighborhood, and I think a very good example of that would be Newport Heights, where if the traffic was backed up on the highway, you might find that Waze or Google Maps would reroute them through that neighborhood. So what we want to do is start to do more outreach with those companies and see if there isn't ways that we can try to reduce that. Have a parking application technology. This is something that we'd like to work on providing, where the user could use the app to determine where there's available parking spaces. So if they were to come down to the beach, they could look on the app and see where's available parking at this time, and whether they're looking for a particular location and there's no available parking and they're just constantly circulating. Perhaps an app could be a benefit. Again, the VMT, the Vehicle Miles Traveled methodology that was approved last year by you and also by the City Council, we're going to formally include that in different policies into this circulation element with the goal of, by reducing VMT, reducing greenhouse gas, and that falls into that section under the climate change. Strategizing for the curbside management within the public right-of-way for kind of perhaps shared ride share, drop-off or valet or delivery, but falls into that bigger category that I mentioned of curbside management. Installing more electric vehicle charging stations. We have some here at City Hall in the parking structure. Looking at improving and adding more charging stations on city property, but then also requiring charging stations to be installed with new development, because we know that there's going to be more and more electric vehicles in the future, and many of the car manufacturers have already indicated that they're going to be just building nothing but electric vehicles in the next maybe 20 years. So we need more charging stations. We want to incorporate that into the policy. And then consolidating parcels to create parking hubs. And this would be basically tied back to the complete streets idea, where if we've got a fixed cross-section of a roadway and there's on-street parking, perhaps there's an opportunity to remove some on-street parking, provide adjacent parking hubs, and move towards complete streets types improvements, such as bike lanes or other ways of improving the complete streets. And so the next steps then, the next virtual workshop that we're going to hold with the public is going to be April the 5th. This has been out in the public, as I mentioned, since last week for their review, so we're hoping that by the time we get to the April 5th that we'll have a lot more comments from people and feedback on the draft. The deadline to provide public written comments on the draft is April 30th. And then we look to go to City Council initially for their review and discussions in May, and then late spring, early summer for a revised document for review. And it's important to note that hand in hand with this circulation element and with drafting these goals and these policies, we have also updated the computer model, the traffic model, so we can now look at development and model it for projections, future traffic projections, and also do traffic studies. So with this RENA and housing element update, that is an important part of that. We will be doing a traffic study for the RENA development and additional units, and that'll be happening soon. We'll be starting that traffic analysis, which will be going through the spring and into summer for incorporation into the housing element update EIR. If you have any questions, I'm available. And also, as I mentioned, Tony Petros with LSA is here with us tonight to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, both Tonys, but thank you, Tony Bryan, for all your hard work. I saw you on the Zoom meetings on a lot of those late nights, so appreciate all your hard work into this. It means a lot to our community. I did want to say something that I glossed over on my comments here. It just said that the commission will be not taking any action tonight, but we may be providing comments or direction to staff and the consultants. So, commissioners, do you have any questions to ask staff with Commissioner Kleiman? Sorry.
I have a couple of questions. The first one being what the intended life of this document is, like when the last time it was updated was, and how far beyond the implementation or adoption of this document do we anticipate updating it again?
Well, that might go hand in hand with the housing element, oftentimes, or the overall general plan update. And there's other elements that will be updated. But in this case, 15 years was the difference. I think that generally we want to keep it in the 10 to 12 year, or somewhere between 10 to 15 years. But we don't want it to go too far between the updates, because conditions are constantly changing. We know here that emerging technology, it's going to continue to change on a year-by-year basis. So I expect this one, we'll be constantly checking back on it, and I'm not sure I can guess when a full update would be, but probably 10 years or possibly even less.
Okay. And then how does this interface with the new draft housing element that has just been released?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a traffic study. And in the traffic study, the whatever the results of the traffic study are, as far as whether there's impacts to the roadway system or whether there's impacts to individual intersections, those changes would then be incorporated into the circulation element update. So if we needed to modify the master plan of highways, or if we needed to propose intersection improvements to address any impacts, that would ultimately come back into a final circulation element. But the traffic study will be looking at whatever impacts there are from the RENA additional units.
Okay. Just another kind of big picture question. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time on this document, and it's intended to be, a formal guideline, but I'm curious if you can talk about how these policies translate to, actual changes throughout the community, addressing some of the major concerns of residents, that we hear at all of the local community events, the same kind of complaints about just general traffic and bicycle issues, obviously parking. Like, how does this translate to a daily impact or change?
Right. Well, these are policies that staff should be following as far as how they're addressing those issues as they're brought to the community. A lot of the day-to-day traffic issues, if they're brought to us, we review those constantly, case-by-case basis, but the overarching policy is there for what we want to do. And in the case of the bicycle master plan as an example, there are projects in that plan that we want to incorporate. And if someone comes to us and says, well, I'd like to have a bicycle lane added on this particular street, we will reference back to that bicycle master plan to see if we're consistent with that. And we would be doing the same thing here by putting together a complete streets master plan, as we want to use that as a framework for future projects.
So what is your take on what we're experiencing? I mean, I'm sure most of us are noticing that our traffic here in the city or throughout the city has definitely increased, the time that it takes you to get from point A to point B, even though theoretically during the time of a pandemic or, what we've had in the last year, you would think less people would be on the road, but it does seem like Pacific Coast Highway and some of the other major arteries are, especially, at those typical traffic times, and certainly on the weekends near the coast, sometimes it's gridlocked or it's at a standstill. So do you have a sense of why that is? Do the numbers support that? Is that unexpected, expected?
It's going to be coming straight from development, regional development, because a street like Coast Highway is a regional facility. So if there's development that's occurring in neighboring jurisdictions, or Irvine or Huntington Beach, or any other jurisdiction or regionally, and a lot of that traffic comes down to Coast Highway. So continual development projects, residential, whatever they happen to be, and they're adding traffic to the system, yes, you will see the additional traffic on especially the primary roadways that we have in the city, which are Coast Highway, Jamboree, MacArthur. There will be, as long as there's continued development in the region, there's going to be increases in traffic, and what we can do is just plan to address that through different ways of, say, traffic signal timing and coordination and synchronization and those types of ways. But yes, there has been, and there will be to some extent some continued traffic.
So I'll just ask one more question and then yield to everyone else. I don't want to monopolize the floor here, but I guess, again, I'm just kind of asking what actual tangible measures will be in place, under these policies, and starting, tomorrow, for example. I know signal timing is one of the things that you mentioned, but, it's one thing to implement these policies. It's another to affect actual change and try to start to alleviate some of the concerns affecting quality of life has been a popular topic throughout the city. Mr. Petros?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Kleiman. Chair Wigan, fellow commissioners, I'm Tony Petros, the president and COO of LSA. Very, very good questions and line of questioning. Let me give you the historical perspective. In 2006, the general plan was adopted. Since that time, those policies and goals, which are really statements of intent, they're not project related, they are policy that the city has available to do things. Because of that document, there were 7 rounds at least of traffic signal improvements in the city of Newport Beach. There were a series of intersection improvements. There was a shuttle that was introduced on the peninsula because that was called for as a vision in the general plan. The bicycle master plan itself was conceived in the general plan, but worked out by city councils in prior years. This document has resulted in many of the city council policies that relate to neighborhood traffic intrusion, the installation of traffic calming devices. Tangible evidence that is throughout this city started with the vision and statement of intent that was included in the general plan. As for traffic in Newport Beach, if you're a citizen of Newport Beach, this is the worst traffic on the planet. But I just encourage you, go to Santa Monica, try Marina del Rey, go to the streets of San Francisco. That's traffic. We actually have it pretty good here. Having said that, though, general plans dating back to the 70s and 80s have always acknowledged that we are the doorstep to the rest of the county. The last general plan estimated that upwards of 70% of the traffic on Coast Highway had nothing to do with Newport Beach, but was just folks coming in and out on their way up the 55, on their way up Jamboree or MacArthur to regional destinations. This city has done well knowing that to try and manage that traffic, the throughput, so that those folks can reach their destinations and we get our streets. So there has been real tangible evidence here. And what we've tried to do is continue that with this round of general plan, giving the Planning Commission, the City Council, and ultimately staff really, the tools to go out and plan for the future, get project specific as we go on to the next century.
Thank you. Commissioner Kleiman, any other questions? Commissioner Klostermeyer?
Yeah, I hear a lot about this term complete streets. I'm not sure I totally have my head wrapped around that. Could you break that down a little bit more, and what does that mean for the future layout of streets in the city?
Right. The complete streets, again, is the idea is, and the goal is to provide for all of the users on the street. So that means, yes, you're providing for vehicles, but you're also providing for adequate facilities for bicycles and adequate facilities for pedestrians and transit and all of the different users on that roadway. As part of preparing that complete street and making those improvements to that street, you're providing facilities on that street for all of those different users. That's what a complete street is. So if that means adding bicycle lanes to the roadway, adding transit pullouts, widening the sidewalk for more pedestrian usage and safer pedestrians, that's essentially a complete street.
And so will you identify streets within the city that need some of these improvements to street sections?
That would be part of a complete street master plan, yes. So we would go through all of the streets in the city and determine what the existing conditions are, and then locations where some complete streets improvements can be made.
Okay, and then just one last question that's kind of neighborhood specific. I'm hearing in the Corona Del Mar Village that there's talk of some people wanting to have one-way streets there. Is that something that would be addressed through the circulation element, or?
Right, no, it wouldn't be addressed through this circulation element. That's a specific project that staff is working with the community. That's another type of traffic project that we work, on a daily basis, project by project. So that doesn't really fall into like a policy, if you will, of that would be in the general plan.
It's just a separate study that staff is working on.
Right. It's a separate study and work with the community based on a request that they have or something they'd like for us to look at.
And is there a timeline for a recommendation from staff on that?
We just had a discussion this morning, in fact, with the Corona Del Mar Residents Association talking about the idea of one-way streets. It can be a lengthy process because we could be looking at a lot of streets and a lot of outreach to the community before anything could be decided.
Lengthy.
I anticipate it to be a lengthy process, most of that being outreach and meetings with the community. Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Klostermeyer, if I may add to that on the complete streets issue, just so that we leave a proper definition. The intent was that there are facilities throughout a community that people from 8 to 80 can walk, wheelchair, roll, do as they want to get to their ultimate destination. It's not to say every road has those facilities. Let me give you a concrete example. Jamboree has undulations. It's a high-speed, multi-lane highway that really is intended for high-speed vehicular traffic in and out of the city, okay? The beauty of our topography and our landscape is that we have the Back Bay right adjacent to it. So what we do is we develop what's called a layered network. Let Jamboree fulfill its role, but at the same time have an adjacent facility that provides for that same connection safely. People can walk, they can skate, they can do as they want along Back Bay and arrive at the same destination. So it may be that a complete street is what's called a layered network, where there are parallel paths to achieve the same goal.
Councilmember Petros, I'm just going to elaborate on that.
Not anymore.
And on the road diet, there was an example in Venice, on Venice Boulevard in Mar Vista, where they did the road diet, kind of a complete streets concept. And that just really messed with a lot of businesses. It actually increased traffic.
Yep.
Who gets the discretion when we're talking about that moving forward? So to protect, the unintended consequences, that the city was saying this is a great idea, and then they implement it, and it really just became destructive.
I think, again, I keep coming back to the way that we do business here in town. One, there are direct policies that enable staff to administer different types of projects, given a certain standard operating procedure. Ultimately, though, it comes to you, the decision makers, and ultimately the city council is the policy maker. That was a very, very bad project to move forward with, and I don't think that that would really see the light of day in a place like Newport Beach unless there were overwhelming benefits through the discretion of the multiple layers here.
Great. So the state can't come in and force that if they determine that it's going to be poor. Good.
Not
Okay,
at all.
cool. Sorry to jump on you guys. Commissioner Ketting.
Is it the idea, Tony or Jim, through Corona del Mar Village to speed up traffic or slow it down on a policy level?
Well, we don't have a policy per se to affect speeds. The goal is obviously improve traffic flow and efficiency, and provide for the different uses on the facility. So I would say overall the goal is efficiency and safety, and we're not looking at necessarily affecting speed by making any particular changes.
Well, one of the problems through the village area on Coast Highway, the parallel parking. Stop, wait, back up. People are trying to get in, they can't get in. Have you guys looked at removing parking? Parallel, street curbside parking in Corona del Mar? Providing it on the back sides. I saw in there's a policy about acquiring residential lots to try to put parking on the back side where it's possible.
Right. Yeah. It's been discussed, and Tony can also probably add to this, but it's been discussed over the years, and I think probably the big thing as far as even looking at removing on-street parking is what impact that would have for the businesses in Corona del Mar. And so that's always been, in the end, the controlling factor is parking for the businesses and the immediately adjacent to those businesses. So there's really no discussion, at least right now, and no plans right now to even look at that. There has been some discussion about whether you want to price the parking on the highway, and even that has not gotten a lot of traction to even look at adding a fee for parking on the highway.
And I am familiar with ad hoc attempts to try and reconsider parking on Coast Highway through Corona del Mar. This document, for the first time, actually allows for policy, statements of intent and vision that staff and decision makers can act upon if it's right to look at underutilized, doesn't have to be residential, underutilized parcels, and then create parking hubs to address what you're talking about for the first time.
Then I guess for me, it's sitting in on this circulation, all these meetings, is the elephant in the room. Regional housing needs, our housing plan, adding more density, taking out underutilized business areas, maybe industrial or manufacturing, and overlaying it for residential. Who comes first? Circulation plan? Because once that density grows, cars grow, then we have to widen the streets in there, I assume, or wherever we're putting this. who's first and who's second?
Hand in hand, I guess is the short answer.
This is City Hall.
Yes. Well, that's exactly why we're doing a traffic analysis with this housing element update, and why we have to. And that's why the circulation element is being updated at the same time as the housing element, because it's the time to do it. So yes, we have to look at the units that are required and where they're being located or where they're being proposed to be located throughout the city, and then run the traffic model and see where the traffic is going to be distributing and whether there's any impacts or whether there's any needs to upgrade the roadway system or make improvements to intersections or something of that nature. But we can't, make that look into the crystal ball right now. We do, though, need to analyze it.
Then I saw last one, Chairman, comment in here again about the consideration of taking acquisition of Coast Highway through Newport Beach. I'm sure it's been kicked around a couple of centuries. Is it realistic, and what would the benefits be? One of you.
The one thing, when we've had discussions with Caltrans in the past, and when we did in fact take over a portion of Coast Highway from Jamboree to Newport Coast, the state actually did contribute money to the city for maintenance and providing for improvements. And from that point forward, or at least anytime there's been recent discussions about taking over any other portions of Coast Highway, the state's offer is zero. So our look at it is, well, we're getting no money to do any maintenance. We're not getting any, all we're doing is taking on liability. But you do get control, so which means that we can then, have the control over the roadway to do whatever, we see fit as far as improvements. So it's a constant trade-off there, but we haven't reached the point where we're saying it's overall, is it worth it to the city to take that on?
Thank you.
Any other commissioner? Yes, Commissioner Kleiman.
Just to quickly tack on to what Chair Ketting was asking about. Well, first of all, to note that you mentioned the businesses along PCH and Corona Del Mar, and I just want to make sure that we're not ignoring the needs of the residents in that area, because of course the businesses are important and we want to support them, but the residents obviously are affected by any of those changes as well. But I guess my question is, how do the policies support that balance, particularly in those types of areas along the coast where you've got businesses, you have residents, you have beach access. In particular, I know there's been a number of, as Mr. Petros addressed before, discussions on how to address these kind of competing elements. I know CDMRA has commissioned a couple of parking studies, even as recently as the last year or two, and it always kind of gets stymied. But I know that one of the things they talked about was making the parking at the beaches free so that it allows people to take advantage of that parking to the fullest extent before they then look to the neighborhoods and the residential areas for that beach parking and access. So can you talk a little, or one of you, both of you, talk a little about, again, how these policies kind of address balancing those various needs?
Well, there are policies in the document now. A lot of them are existing that talk about parking and parking management and trying to think if there's one in particular that talks about residential permit programs. I don't think there is, but there's certainly general policies that address parking, and there have been a number of parking studies, like you said, in Corona Del Mar, but other areas of the city as well, the peninsula and Balboa Village. And Jim worked extensively on the Balboa Village parking management program. And through this update, we could be potentially working on other types of parking management programs in other areas of the city that are parking. There's a real parking demand. So in particular, that's probably one policy that would perhaps focus more on particular areas of the city at a time to come up with an overall program. But yes, there have been ideas that the community in Corona Mar have been, would like for the city to look at, and there was a large survey that went out to the Corona Mar residential area asking what their thoughts were on some of those ideas. So this is an ongoing discussion right now.
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Rosine?
Just this concept of the competing issues is something that, and especially along Pacific Coast Highway and the whole concept of Caltrans and widening or traffic calming, this document I don't think specifically addresses it, but you've got Corona Del Mar in that business district area, and then there's areas like Mariners Mile, who potentially could be similar, but not obviously not the same. What's the vision, and how do you apply that when we've got the ownership issues and development issues? How do we apply a vision to something like that?
I'll start. I'll take that one, and then allow Tony to comment. That is probably the stickiest issue of this circulation element. Remember first that the city of Newport Beach has very little discretion over those parts of PCH. The Mariners Mile segment is owned by Caltrans. The only reason that Corona Del Mar is the way it is because the city has discretion over it. The other part of it is that in order to maintain eligibility for millions of dollars every year of transportation funds, the city has to be consistent with the county's vision of the road system. We're the only county in California that has this master plan that encompasses the entire county. And the way that the hook is, you want state grant funds, you play with us and maintain that consistency. So in as much as there may be the bull's rush to go out and do something other than what that master plan says, you have to look at what the impact is in terms of the ability then to maintain our street system. As the document stands right now, the document says that we will maintain consistency with the regional facility map. That then would mean that Mariners Mile would still be that major highway on the map. When that happens, how that happens, the document's silent on. Why? Because it's not a project document. It's a policy document. The tension there is if you want to leave Mariners Mile the way it is, modeling has shown that traffic's going to find its way to its ultimate destination. And if it gets pinched down in Mariners Mile, the way it's going to do it is up in the heights. So, whose ox gets gored? The folks in the heights, the folks adjacent to Coast Highway. And add on all of the other regional stew that, prevents the city from entertaining a fast action. That's why the document says it is a statement of intent to stay consistent with the regional document. If there ever is a desire to do something otherwise, wonderful. Norma Glover, back in the early 80s, late 70s, was the city councilwoman for District 2. And it was her and her predecessors that had to deal with this. So this is something that's been going on for 4 or 5 decades.
Any other commissioner comment? Commissioner Kleiman?
Sorry, last one. On that point or subject, and I know this is a controversial issue, the widening or not of PCH, particularly through Mariners Mile, and actually one of the very first agenda items that I had to review as a commissioner here was the revitalization plan for that area, which ultimately got shelved. But it did, if I recall, seem like we had conflicting policies there were certain councils, again, to your point, historically, that had one idea of what should happen there, and then there were some other places in documents in various areas that, again, conflicted, whether it was a policy or something else. So will this document resolve those? Because I know, again, we tried to address it in that revitalization plan, but then nothing came of it
Yeah, I don't want to give you the false sense that there will be resolution. The resolution will come when folks come into these chambers and address the city council for an ultimate policy decision and dispensation of that. What this document does do is it makes one statement about the master plan, and that master plan be consistent with the regional plan. So there is no schizophrenia in this document. There is one statement that we stay and maintain that consistency for purposes of good regional planning and also for purposes of good transportation funding.
And I'll follow up on that again. The past city councils have been, at least in the last 2 times that we've gone to city council, in I think 2013 and again in 15, when this whole discussion of Mariners Mile came up and 6-lane facility and the master plan, in both cases, the council said, stay with the master plan designation. We're not going to go off in a different route right now. Now, and the key is, yes, it's a planning document. It's not, like Tony said, it's not a construction document. It's not saying 6 lanes, we're building it tomorrow. We're drafting the plans in the office right now to build it. It just means it's 6 lanes on a planning document, which means ultimately, at least the discussion, the plan is that, but it may never be built to 6 lanes. But you have to include that in the regional plan, and you have to include that in the traffic model. Overall, it's a big picture discussion. So right now, at least for staff, as we're preparing this, we're saying consistent with what all the actions have been. We're proposing maintenance and consistency with the master plan of arterial highways. If there's further discussion, I think it's going to go to the council level if there wants to be further discussion on that.
Commissioner Ketting.
In that vein, I keep hearing about the regional transportation plan. Do we have a seat at that table that make these decisions? Not we, but the city.
The Orange County Transportation Authority has a board. That board is comprised of each one of the supervisors. So first, there is a proxy. The District 2 supervisor should be speaking on our behalf. There are also area representatives. Don Webb was the last Newport Beach representative on the OCTA board. It's circulated around, and I believe now it's a representative from Huntington Beach that is representing this general coastal area. If one of the council members really wanted to show an interest, I'm certain that they could be considered for the OCTA board.
Yeah, city councils have their own votes within their own councils, or not our council, but all the councils to choose and select these members. There's a selection process.
Correct.
And the other thing as well, from a functioning, working relationship with OCTA, the directors, the public works directors, all attend regular meetings where you basically in the room and with OCTA and all the public works directors in the county, they're discussing topics such as this and many topics, but we have our public works director going to regular meetings at OCTA.
Commissioner Rosie.
Just as it relates to funding, because that's where it all comes down to at the end of the day, could parking be used from some of those state funds for areas like Mariners Mile or is that just, it has to comply, that funding needs to comply with the road network concept? Does that make sense? Can you do that?
There are different purposes of funds that are stepped down from either the federal government or the state government. And they have very specific purposes. at OCTA, who is our regional funding agent. I believe they've got as many as 30 or more different transportation funding definitions, and you fall within those. The city, you should be very proud of this staff in the way they leverage tax dollars to get more money from the state and these other programs. So it's, we are leveraging our money to get bigger gains to be able to do these things. But there's always requirements and different eligibilities that have to be done. With parking dollars, there's an even more arcane system about who gets to use what, and is it in the tidelands, is it not, is it in these different areas, and where does it go? So I'm certain there are smarter folks than me that could figure out a way to weave that, but it would take a lot of work, I think.
And in a lot of cases, these funding programs are competitive, so we're in there competing against Anaheim, Santa Ana, whoever is going for that funding, and so that's also part of the eligibility and the competitive funding.
Councilman Lowry? Or, sorry, I jumped that. Commissioner Lowry.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Petros working up in Santa Monica for a number of years. I mean, Newport Beach is a pleasure compared to some of the problems I have up there. So, I mean, reviewing all of this, I just want to give you guys compliments. I think we're going in the right direction and trying to solve a lot of potential problems as more growth happens. But I think Newport Beach, with obviously our natural beauty we have here, all the different various water activities, you have major corporations like PIMCO and Pacific Life based here, people coming in at the doorstep of a major university with UCI. So I think we do a good job, and I think what you guys are trying to implement here will make it even better. So I know with a lot of changes with self-driving cars, when that really happens, and different things, it'll be interesting, and maybe roads get more efficient when people say let the car do it, and we even get to a better situation. So all in all, I think it's great. The only thing I would maybe a thing for me is just such an example, like I look at 6.2 X5, the electrical vehicle EV charging stations, which is great. And we just put requiring EV charging stations to be installed in new develops. Maybe, I always love the word incentivize, maybe a little bit better than requirement. Just a suggestion, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, and I had a kind of a few of them here that I'd like to go over, perhaps adding some policy additions, and then maybe some comments or questions. One was, and Councilman Petros, you probably remember when former Councilmember Selleck was kind of looking at an idea that would take traffic off of PCH to go to either the airport or to Newport Center, but to go up Newport Coast, then to head to SR 73. Is there a thought that anyone has ever had to buy off our TCA obligations for Bonita Canyon and for Newport Coast Drive, so that Newport residents can effectively go those routes without incurring a toll? MacArthur's an example right now. So if you're heading south on 73 and you want to exit, a lot of people just exit MacArthur because it's the free route. But if those other exits, Bonita and Newport Coast, were available, that would alleviate some of the stress. I think they're doing a Caltrans improvement right now that's spending a significant amount of money to improve that off-ramp. So I'd like to perhaps add some discussion in here for future to work with TCA to, I don't know, either benefit Newport residents or just eliminate those two toll exits and work on solutions that could help improve.
Sure. That's very, as a statement of intent, I don't see why something couldn't be crafted. Tony and I can do that. But let me just mention, the TCA is an independent joint powers authority. We have a representative, I believe, Council Member O'Neill is on the San Joaquin Corridor Board. That is a $100 million profit center for that JPA. And I think to suggest that it would be something that they would entertain might be jumping the shark.
Sure, sure. And maybe there's some type of subsidy for Newport residents that would be connected through the toll transponder that, remedies local implications. So if you're a resident, you would be removed from any toll or fee so that you can transport within your city without taking up that additional burden.
I did reach out to Councilmember O'Neill when that question was raised in our pre-meeting, and he had indicated that it would require an amendment to the bond covenants for TCA. And so I think that that's another hurdle that we would probably face.
Sure, but a document that goes into the future, I think it's important to, look to potential, avenues, especially if they are causing burdens on other areas. And I do know that the traffic backs up on MacArthur there. There's a significant block.
Can I make maybe an observation and a suggestion? The TCA had on the 241-91 project had created a mitigation fund based off of tolls that were forecast for that new interchange that were to be used for traffic mitigation in that general area. It might be something that we could put into a policy that might suggest to encourage TCA or work with TCA to look at a similar mitigation strategy around the San Joaquin Hills corridor.
Perfect.
Something to that event that wouldn't disrupt the bond covenants, but that would use funds, the stream of funds, to our benefit.
Yeah, because there's a way around going those tolls. It's significant. Right. It's just going to tie up other areas of the city to do so. Another one we were talking about was in Vehicle Code 21,000 was related to bikes and e-bikes in particular. So perhaps adding some language that says work with the legislature to address the increased e-bike usage. Perhaps adding either more training, licensure, safe use, protective equipment. I know that there's a discussion on page 31 that talks about sidewalk joint use, but I'm watching these kids with these e-bikes, and they're not on the sidewalk, they're in the regular street, and they're wearing a bicycle helmet. So at some point, going 30 miles an hour on those e-bikes, there's just an accident waiting to happen. And there's almost like a delinquency to it. And, I was a kid, I probably would do the same things, but that peer pressure when you're with another friend, you kind of act up. So I think we should be discussing it a little bit in more discussion, at least trying to address the legislative changes that can be made to, get those e-bikes with a little bit more safe practices. Another area, I'd like to identify locations where lighted crosswalks at ground level are pertinent in the city. I know that and Councilman Petros, you know this area because you live by it, but over on Westcliff, there are 2 lighted crosswalks, but I see it and I feel that it's not adequate enough to the driver to see that when somebody's trying to cross there. So I'd like to see more lighted intersection or crosswalk pathways that they have like in Laguna Beach that would go in certain areas. So perhaps the city could identify locations where those would be an area to improve, because I think that those 2 examples on Westcliff are clear examples that we need those. And then as I keep wanting to call you councilman, but Commissioner Lowry mentioned on 34 on the charging stations. I drive a hydrogen car, and fuel cell technology is increasing. So at some point there could be some discussion about that. So if we're talking about a future document, just add in other types of concepts. And I think hydrogen fuel cells is an area that, while it's not something you would put in anyone's house or resident or development, there's one at the Shell station that's in development, but perhaps you could partner with entities that provide that. So those are my areas that I'd like to see added to the document. Questions I think I had were, let's see, just got my notes here. School access. Since my wife is now a school board member, there's some discussion about who communicates with who. So when you're talking about areas around schools and how those access points or discussion and access happens, who's talking with whom? I just curious to know if we have regular meetings, if the district sponsors them, if the city sponsors them, or if it's kind of a continual, discussion that flows.
I can only share with you my experience, and that was that it was up to me to reach out to the school board members, and working with Tony and Dave Webb, we collected them, but staff has regular communication with members at the district. But I think I think what you're getting to is a little more gravitas to that by either having somebody from the commission or the council also be identified as the liaison.
Yeah, I think there's areas that, like I just, by the high school over off 16th Street, it's, not really a circulation discussion, but it's, littered with trash. And I don't know if the trash is coming from 880 or if the trash is coming from the school, but, how does that, who discusses it when it's on city property versus school property? But there's a lot of, areas. There was the Ensign issue with the trees, and there was, the discussion about that. It turns out it was a school district thing that was rushed through, and the city didn't really have much say on what was going on other than perhaps the trees. But, just having good communication, and I'm not saying that the city has failed in the past. I'm not any blame. I just wonder if there's a way to increase it, because just seeing firsthand as working or living with a school board member, you see that there's sometimes discussions that don't happen with the school and the city and their partners. So I just want to make sure that that's being addressed.
Right, and I have regular communications with school district staff, and there are quarterly meetings has been the way that we've been doing it. And the quarterly meetings have had generally 2 board members at the meeting. The city manager has been at those meetings, myself, our public works director. So that's the way we've been doing it for some time, although COVID's kind of pulled back on that a little bit. But typically, quarterly meetings has been the regular program.
Okay. And then there was some discussion on the Avon parking lot relocation, page 35. Explain that a little bit.
Like I said, that's an old policy. I think maybe the only reason why the Avon lot was even specifically pulled out is because it's a municipal lot in that area, and whether there would be another location for a municipal lot versus where that one was located. But beyond that, I think that policy is certainly open to looking at it again. Because certainly since 2006 things have changed, but I think the initial intent was just the fact that it was a municipal lot and where it was located.
It could probably be scratched if.
Yeah, we'll have more discussion. We could propose that one is maybe outdated, but right, I think that one's open for discussion.
And then on page 31, water taxis. Is this even feasible anymore? I mean, you go wake speed, so taxis are something I think of when you're in Laughlin and you can go as fast as you can to connect casino to casino. But out here, going wake speed and parking in, say, a parking lot over by Avon, walking across, then getting on a Duffy to take you to Shorebird over at View, that's going to take you 30 minutes. It's not really a water taxi per se, but it does seem to, if the View has limited parking and they've got, a lot of restaurants to go to, do you park on Mariners Mile or any part of the city and then get into that and alleviate any of the parking, say at the View that would occur? So I think it's a good concept, but in our harbor, wake speed is fast you're going to go. So
right, and that is another one to look at. And I know that again, the whole concept of water taxis has never really proven to be borne out. But I still want to have some openness to different ways of having transportation within the harbor, but I don't want to scrap the whole idea of water transportation, but
sure.
But I think maybe specifics like water taxis, we can certainly look at that specific use.
I like the idea. I think there's merit to it. I don't know if it's feasible. That guess is where I'm going.
Right.
Well, I think quite possibly as a statement of intent and policy, the city of Newport Beach encourages good use of the harbor for local circulation, and let the market then determine whether a taxi's good, if somebody's going to start their own little Duffy service, if there's something we haven't even thought about yet that could become a good service that provides a profit.
Yeah, I don't suggest scratching it. I think
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea. Just wondering how feasible it's going to be and how much cost it's going to associate to it. And I think there probably is a lot. So, and then I guess that kind of goes on to in the shuttle throughout the different villages is kind of what was mentioned in there. Is that feasible? Is that something that there's going to be an interest to? I know there was heated discussion on the trolley on the peninsula. You know, some people hated it, some people liked it. They use the Avon parking lot to gather from, and then or park at, and then go to use the trolley. Is that something that works seasonally better, or is that something because Laguna does like a seasonal, but they sometimes have other times of the year? So just curious a little bit more into that.
The Peninsula Shuttle has been, has had very good ridership actually, and we get funding from OCTA for the summertime Peninsula Shuttle. So that's been a good program. What we've looked at here is just discussed it as perhaps trying a pilot program. And the most recent one we've been talking with OCTA pre-COVID was the idea of having maybe a micro-mobility, like smaller types of, not full-size vans perhaps, but smaller units that could connect Corona del Mar and Newport Center and Balboa Island and having that type of system. And we did have some initial discussions with OCTA. So is it viable? I think there could be a viability to that type of program. So, I think it's something I would certainly look at as, proposing for funding to OCTA or looking at a pilot. And if it doesn't fly, it doesn't, because there have been over the years a number of different shuttles have been tried and then stopped. The one on the peninsula has been probably the most successful one.
Great. Sorry, guys, I keep having a bunch of these that I've written down. But the usage during COVID in some cities have blocked off streets, promenades, that type of allowing people to gather outside and dine outside and have that. How would that impact future discussions on this? Is this just a temporary, glitch where we would never do that, or is that something that we could have future discussion with as far as parking or kind of dining on streets and blocking off roadways to do so?
Right. There's a little bit of discussion of that in the narrative, talking about the possibility. There's no policy written right now for that, but there may be areas where it could make sense. There, Cannery Village perhaps as one location to look at, because you have the hotel and you've got other retail businesses and such in the area. So you could look at particular areas for doing something like that, closing it on a weekend or however you want to do it. But so it's something to look at.
You may be given discretion to say if it's a restaurant with alcohol involved, the chief of police to decide is that something that should happen at that get a special permit for, or it's something every year that they do it seasonally, or if it's a specific to a holiday.
Right.
Okay. And then on Santa Ana River, that change from the 19th Street Bridge, what areas would you really be looking at to do? Are you referring more now to change that so that there's actually more mobility going the other direction, going up and down the river banks, or are you saying more still to have discussion about crossing at different intersections or different streets? Or is this, I'm just curious, why would we add that if you removed the 19th Street?
Yeah, it's just maybe looking for other ways of having mobility along the river, not crossing the river, but along the river. Are there different ways of traveling from say, Coast Highway up to Huntington Beach or Fountain Valley or wherever you're going? Is there other ways of providing mobility other than bicycles and pedestrians and such? So that's the thinking.
A real good example of that would be out in the desert, throughout the Coachella Valley, from Palm Springs all the way to Indio, along the White Water Wash. The levees are now being used, and it's constructed by CVAG, their regional agency, for electric vehicles. So you could take your golf cart and actually bypass Highway 111 and go all the way through the entire desert communities on this path. It could look here that the levees of the Santa Ana River are a multi-use facility. They could be stationed with bike stations along the way if that was the mode. They could be widened to allow for and permit neighborhood electric vehicles. There could be crossings for those intermittently. It's allowing for the possibility.
Great.
And actually allowing for the possibility of the unknown.
Yeah, I do like that, and I know a lot of friends that go ride their bikes all the way to Angel Stadium, and they make it a thing. So that, that's a great idea. I like that addition. Just two more: level of service that's being removed. Can you just highlight that? I guess state law now says it doesn't matter.
No, level of service is not being removed.
Or not being removed, but the state is saying that you don't have metrics with CEQA anymore on that.
No, what we're going to be doing when we do traffic analysis is we'll be doing both, level of service analysis and for environmental documents, the vehicle miles traveled analysis. So we're not removing the level of service policies in the general plan. That's still something we want to maintain, and we want to be able to analyze level of service as part of projects to determine if there's impacts with that. But so we've got twofold that's going to be happening. And we'll be doing both. We're not removing the level of service at all.
Okay, good. That was just a confusion level on me then. Thank you. And then lastly, you talked about the Uber Lyft curbside, but the UPS, Amazon deliveries, FedEx deliveries, it usually is more on residential streets that it impacts, but they'll just stop right in the middle, of the street, not really park, but. Does the city find that to be any issues on the major streets that we identify in the circulation element? Because that stuff's going to only be increasing with the amount of retail that people are shopping with.
Right, and I think what we're looking at here with looking at some different ways of doing curbside management is, if there's adjacent businesses on some of the roadways, and they need to make deliveries to those businesses, is there a place to establish a loading area or a delivery area on the curb next to those businesses? So it's more of a business-related delivery than it is a residential delivery.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other commissioners' question? Yeah, Commissioner Rosing.
Real quick, just to go back to the concept of the housing element and the traffic study that was mentioned. Just so that I'm clear, what'll happen is that the densities will be identified in terms of location for the housing element, and then there's going to be a traffic study based on those densities. Is that the outcome of that going to come back to this body?
Yes.
Yeah.
It absolutely will, and it's part of the housing element update. And so, yes, the conclusions of that traffic analysis and the densities and the locations of the units is all part of that, and it will go into the EIR. It'll be a portion of the EIR. So whether there's impacts identified in that analysis, if there are, then we would address that in the circulation element.
State law specifies that, state general plan law specifies that there has to be the term correlation between the circulation element and the land use element. They have to be hand in hand. They have to be coordinated. So what you have is the initial thoughts on the circulation element, the policies, the setting, all of the discussion. It will be complete, as Tony indicates, when we understand what the implications are, and if there's any changes to maps by virtue of these intensities, if there's any tweaking of policies to enable the housing element, that will be done. There may be a discussion of what the housing element does to mobility, just so that it's clear to the public and they can read it. That may also be included.
Any other commissioner comment? I mean, anything that we missed tonight or we want to delete later, this is kind of a working document. So, I mean, we get an opportunity to go back and add something, delete something, do whatever we want. So
yes,
we kind of have some good discretion up here. Okay, all right. I'm going to move on to the public and take public comment on this item. If you're watching remotely and want to provide comments, the phone number is 949-270-8165, and we'll go to Mr. Mosier here in the chambers.
Thank you, Chair Wyken, members of the commission. I have no comments on the substance of the draft circulation element at this point, but I do have a number of technical comments or questions about it. First of all, I'm aware that the existing circulation element has a number of figures, illustrations, and I think some tables in it. In the draft that was printed out here, there are no illustrations or figures, although it refers to them in the text. So I'm wondering if any of the figures are being updated as a result of the update. Many of them are maps showing routes and so forth. And if any of them are being deleted or new ones being added. A second comment, possibly related to Commissioner Kleiman's concerns about how the policies translate into action. If you look at the draft, you'll notice all of the existing policies end with a little parenthetical comment after them, like IMP 14.1. Those parenthetical additions after each existing policy refer to another part of the general plan, which is called the implementation program. And those are implementation steps for the policies. I notice none of the new policies have any reference to an implementation program or plan. So I'm wondering, number one, are any of the old implementation plans being changed? And are any new ones being introduced? The third comment I have, although this is a mercifully short document compared to the housing element, I at least, especially when trying to view it on a computer screen, it would be helpful to have a table of contents. So going through page by page, you kind of know in advance what is coming up or what the general layout of the thing is. In our existing general plan, each element does have a table of contents, but they're all consolidated at the very beginning of the general plan in a separate document. It would be very helpful if the table of contents specific to each element was reprinted with the element, so a person reading that element would kind of have an overview of what they're looking at. Another technical comment, I made the same comment last night at the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee looking at the housing element draft. In the electronic version, as in the printed one, each page has this watermark saying draft on it. And people are trying at home to read this on a computer screen and comment on the things. They find that they can swipe over the words that are outside the watermark, but anything in this part of the page you cannot. So somebody in the staff technically can perhaps remove the watermark or put it behind the text instead of on top of it. And then the final comment I have is last night at the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee, a big point was made about the need for that element to be submitted rather promptly to the state who has to review and certify it. So I am wondering, in connection with the circulation element, whether there is any state review that is needed or possible to ensure that it is actually adequate for doing what it's supposed to do. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Okay, I will go to the phone. One caller. Okay, you're on. Please mute your telephone, or sorry, your TV.
Yes, thank you. This is David Tanner, members of the commission. I have several comments. I provided some written comments for you. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. The primary concern is the Pacific Coast Highway and Mariners Mile. That's an issue that has been discussed for a while with the City Council, and they have expressed concern that they don't want to widen Pacific Coast Highway further. And so I don't think it's something that the Planning Commission or staff should ignore, as staff proposed earlier tonight. So I think we need to look at this. We need to look at alternate ways in which to developed within the right-of-way, whether the right-of-way is continues to be acquired and we put in complete streets or something like that. I think we need to look at this because it's clear the community has expressed a concern about further widening of Mariner's Mile. So I think we also, I haven't heard you speaking tonight, but it was in my comments that we need to look at vehicle miles traveled and how to reduce that. It would be very nice for the public to see graphics for road right-of-ways where future bridges are shown that might go over the arterial highways, such as Pacific Coast Highway and Superior Avenue. It would be nice to know what the city is thinking in terms of these types of improvements. Finally, Mr. Petros has a long history, a very good history with the city, but he is part of LSA, which is the environmental consultant. And unfortunately, the role of the environmental consultant is neutral. So I don't think it's appropriate for Mr. Petros to be making comments in favor of a certain action. I think it's appropriate for him to respond to environmental concerns, environmental impacts, but not to be a project proponent in any way. So I think that's something that needs to be clarified because we have to have a neutral review. And based on the discussions that are happening so far, it doesn't sound like LSA is neutral. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other callers? Okay. I will close the public comment and bring it back to the commission for a further discussion and direction. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay. All right. I'm going to end the discussion on this and move on to the next item. Is that appropriate? Okay, great. Okay, staff and commissioner items. Item number 5, any motions for reconsideration? Seeing none. Item 6, report by the Community Development Director, a request for matters which Planning Commission members would like placed on future agendas. Director's report. Mr. Campbell.
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that tonight. Got a couple items here for you. I wanted to let everyone know that we have a housing element virtual workshop Monday, March 22nd, starting at 6 o'clock, 6 to 8. So that'll be, we've had one meeting on the housing element with the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee, but we're taking it to the public in a virtual forum on Monday night. So you're invited to do that. Circulation element workshop, we're going to be doing a session similar to this with the public in a virtual format on Monday, April 5th as well, 6 to 8. So on the next regular Planning Commission meeting is April 8th, and we have 2 items scheduled for at this point in time. And that's a study session on the draft housing element. So we're going to be spending some quality time going over what's in that document. So we'll have staff and the consultants here to assist us with that. We're also going to have a public hearing on a minor code amendment in one of our zones, the Dover Westcliff area. So there are 2 items for next meeting. A couple items on the council's agenda that I want to let you know about. The council did approve that wine tasting ordinance amendment in the industrial zone, and the second reading of that will be next week. The council also did, and I may have indicated this earlier, but I can't recall, but they did approve the amendment to allow the elimination of the non-conforming sign amortization. So that's all been settled and approved. The city council also did direct staff to look at parking, commercial parking rates, parking for restaurants, expanded use of parking management districts, all of which are actually embodied in some of the policies that we were discussing earlier here. So the council is kind of asking staff to go ahead and study those issues. So we'll be preparing an RFP and bring on a transportation and parking consultant to assist us there. And the last item I wanted to let you know about is that at the last meeting, the council did adopt a new council policy. It's Council Policy K4. It's entitled Reducing Barriers to the Creation of Housing. And so there's a variety of issues in there, but in principle, what it does is that it directs the staff and the Planning Commission to develop and modify as necessary and aggressively implement strategies and action plans that are designed to accelerate housing production consistent with the policy and as described in the following sections. So that's kind of verbatim right out of the policy. And those sections that they're looking at is the production of accessory dwelling units, The Planning Commission review and recommendations for mixed-use designations. I guess there's the thought that those mixed-use designations are maybe underperforming as we may have envisioned them in the general plan. And so we'll be formulating a plan of attack for that and involving the commission at a later date. The other item is related to mixed-use resort opportunities, and so there'll be likely an interpretation allowing for mixed-use resorts to kind of modify and grow with the emerging changes in that area, really in support of the hotel industry, which is struggling right now, obviously. Anyway, I want to let you know that those are there, and so that new council policy is at the city's website under the council policies. If you like, I can send you a link to that through the email system if you want to take a look at it and read it. I'll go ahead and do that and send you an email. And that's my report.
Great. Any questions from Commissioner Kleiman?
Do you know offhand what the council vote was on the wine tasting item?
It was a split vote, and we had 2 council members voting against, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just to go over, April 5th is the virtual public workshop on that circulation element that we just kind of talked about. So if anyone
Yes.
wants to add any input to what, or they watch the tape of tonight, they can comment on that, or does it really just listening only?
It can be listening only. If you have got some thoughts or comments, you're more than welcome to express them. One of the things we're asking on the circulation element, and Mr. Bryan indicated, is that if there's any comments, we'd like to get them by the end of April. So there's going to be an extended period of time for the community to review this. And so if you folks have any thoughts or comments you want to pass on to us or to Tony, please do so. You can just email them to us and we'll evaluate them. But we'd like to get comments in by the end of April.
Great, thanks. And commissioners requesting any future agenda items? And I'll open to the public on this item. Seeing none, okay. I'll ask the request for continued or for excused absences. Any commissioners? Okay, seeing none. We are adjourned.